In this video, I'm going to be building an awesome RX 7000 series gaming PC build to finally answer the question on everyone's minds right now. Have AMD killed off Nvidia's new rip-off GPUs with their 7900 XT and XTX? There really is only one way to find out. I'll be covering the best parts to pair this up with, a deep delve into the performance of AMD's new cards compared to all the competition, and seeing whether these new GPUs are really all that worth it. Let's do this.
Ready, set, go.
The Corsair Xenon 32-inch gaming monitor is a panel that packs a punch, bringing your games and media to life on a vibrant, ultra-slim 32-inch IPS 4K display. It's a panel with some power. What's more, the fast 144Hz refresh rate and nippy 1 millisecond response time ensure you can keep a competitive edge. Learn more about the Xenon 32 UHD 144 at the first links in the description below, and buy now on the Corsair web store. Now let's start off, shall we, with a look at the new graphics cards. This video is going to focus on the slightly more expensive XTX, the more expensive of the two new cards. This one here is $999, with the XT coming in at a cheaper $899. So by no means cheap, but a good chunk cheaper than the $1,200 RTX 4080. You'll also notice immediately that this card is a good chunk smaller. AMD have kept the normal 2 and a little bit slot form factor with a new updated Radeon design that looks sick. You get this little red stripe of gaming, which I find quite cool, and red accents on the rear backplate, with sort of a unibody design that you'd find on a Founders card, but a bit more split up and a bit more angular and gaming oriented. The card still has a little bit of RGB, you've got 3 fans to keep it cool, and a traditional set of 8-pin power connectors. No PCI Gen 5 unit here, so no worries about mounting cables, controversial adapters, or anything of the kind. Obviously, this card only requires 2 8-pins, is pretty power efficient, which will also mean you haven't got to upgrade your power supply, so a win there from AMD. In all of the media and the press materials we've received, they're clearly pitting these cards against the 4080 and then any rumoured Nvidia release at potentially the slightly lower end rather than the 4090, a card which looks to retain that top GPU spot for the foreseeable future if you're prepared to pay for it. In terms of other core specifications, the XTX comes with 24GB of VRAM on a 384-bit memory bus, with the XT non-X version coming in with 20GB on a 320-bit memory bus. So both very, very well-equipped cards in the memory department. I will say that it is refreshing to see a GPU in a much more compact and traditional form factor than Nvidia's new entrants, and it's clear that AMD have gone for a slightly more conventional route on their new graphics cards. I'll be taking a detailed look into performance later, but the TLDR and the summary is, this thing's pretty good. It exceeds the RTX 4080 in straight rasterization performance, and in our extensive range of gaming benchmarks, wins against the 4080 more than it loses. Doing so at a price point that's $200 cheaper is mightily impressive, but it is worth noting in games where ray tracing and particularly DLSS 3 are involved, the 4080 can, in some instances, take quite a substantial lead. This is hardly surprising given how good Nvidia's DLSS 3 technology is, and straight rasterization, AMD have killed it in a card that's more compact, more power efficient, and at the moment at least, cheaper to get your hands on. If Nvidia come along and price match this card with their 4080, something they should have done in the first place anyway, it should never have cost $1,200, then maybe we're having a slightly more tricky conversation. But until then, AMD are onto a winner with their new 7900 XTX. All of this data is all good and well, but what parts are we actually going to pair up with this graphics card? Well, on the CPU side, I've gone for the AMD Ryzen 9 7950X. It's AMD's top-end Ryzen 9 chip, and although traditionally at the moment I'd recommend the 13900K as a better overall CPU, with features like AMD Smart Access Memory, where our CPU can tap into the GPU's VRAM, this makes a lot of sense. Plus, it is so nice to have an all Team Red build that you can actually recommend on merit as being the best option at this price point. In terms of other components in the build today, I've picked up some AMD specific DDR5 memory. This is a 32GB Expo kit from Corsair, which gives us clock speeds of 6000 MHz. One, of course, of the, not disadvantages, but quirks of Ryzen 7000 is that it only supports supports DDR5 memory, something which can push cost up a little bit, though it is worth noting how much DDR5 RAM prices have fallen in the last little bit. My motherboard choice in this build is the ASUS TUF Gaming X670E Plus. It's got Wi-Fi on board, it's got a really nice ASUS TUF aesthetic, which will match with the build very well, and of course it supports the new Ryzen 7000 processors. It's not the most expensive design out there too, saving us a little bit of money. Storage will be provided by a 2TB Seagate FireCuda 530. It's the fastest Gen 4 NVMe on the market. And that's basically all you've got to say. There's a full review of this SSD alongside AMD's brand new 7900 XTX over on the website, which I'll link in the description and in the cards section now. Cooling is going to be provided by Deepcool's LT720. This is a really strong CPU liquid cooler that we've tested and been very impressed with. It also matches the case, something I'll come on to in a moment, and helps provide plenty of cooling to keep the pretty warm actually Ryzen 7950X processor nice and chilly. One of the keys with AMD Ryzen 7000 is letting it run at those high temperatures so it can turbo up. If cooling is a problem in a new Ryzen build, you will lose some serious amounts of performance, and nobody wants that. That's why I've picked up as well the Deepcool CH510 Mesh Digital. This is an all-mesh case with a little screen at the top, providing the best of both worlds in terms of aesthetic, system monitoring, and airflow. It's pretty plain in terms of the black design, but we are going to spruce it up with some RGB, both in the form of the GPU, the fans, the radiator. This thing is going to look pretty banging in the end, and hopefully you guys will be impressed with it. Power is the final thing to note, and this is going to be provided by Coolmaster's brand new V750i Gold. This is an ATX 3.0 power supply that also boasts the new PCI 5.0 power connector. Not of course that we'll be needing it for this build, as AMD have opted for the traditional 2 8-pin power connectors. I think this was the right call from AMD for now, but next generation, if wattages do continue to increase, and of course we iron out the issues with the Gen 5 connection, I would like to see it, because when it works and you've got that singular cable without the need for the splitter, it is a very clean way of getting everything installed. As always, latest pricing and availability will be linked at the affiliate links down in the description below for Amazon and other retailers. There's the CPU in, followed by the memory in DIMM slot number 2, and then DIMM slot number 4, and then after that you can round things off with the SSD. So you just need to take off this little cover here where you can pop a PCI Gen 5 or in our case Gen 4 NVMe drive. And once that's in, the motherboard assembly looking pretty good. The Asus TUF design, a little bit more bare bones than some of their options, but the I/O's still really solid. 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, 20 gig USB-C, 10 gig USB-C, Wi-Fi 6E. What more could you want? Only thing really I need to do to round things out is add in some CPU cooler mounting prep for later, but nothing too major. Once all of that's done, we can move over into the case and then finally get this GPU in and test out the 7900 XTX. I was going to say in real life. I don't know what this would be if this wasn't real life. Now, as I said earlier, the CH510 Mesh Digital is a really solid case. Deepcool have had some awesome chassis out this year, and of course, with our graphics card being a bit smaller, we don't need a humongous case to fit it in, unlike the 4080. Flu season, baby. And here we are. So we're going to take off all the side panels. It's actually toolless for the tempered glass panel, which is a nice touch. And then also bop off the rear panel, which has got these nice captive thumb screws to keep things simple, before laying the case down flat for the motherboard assembly. This is the stage where you actually move the completed motherboard assembly into the case. Lovely stuff. Before screwing it into place through all of the included standoff locations. This will stop the board from going anywhere. And now I can finally do it. I can put in the 7900 XTX. I've chucked off the PCI protector. I'm going to push back the clip on the PCI slot and pop this thing in. AMD, by the way, I'm loving the design of this card. Sick. The colour scheme. Oh, it's kind of classy, but gamery. And I love it. And once that's in, a couple of screws to fasten it down, followed by the CPU cooler next. I'm going to add the radiator into the top of the build and the block onto our Ryzen processor. And then we're nearly there. We're on the home straight of actually getting this thing finished. The final step is to install the power supply. I talked earlier about why this is a solid option. Of course, the XTX doesn't require all that many power connectors, but you still want a power supply capable of providing enough power so that when the GPU boosts up, you're not going to see any sacrifices. To make things a little bit more snazzy aesthetically, I've also picked up these cheap, easy DIY fab cable extensions, which you can find linked down below. They do a black kit, a black and a white kit, a black and a purple kit, a blue kit. They do lots of different kits for lots of different aesthetics. We'll be plugging up motherboard, CPU, and GPU power cables to the fully modular interface on this Cooler Master 750 50 watt unit. While I'm here, I'm also going to pop in some RGB fans for good measure to the front of the case and make sure the non-RGB fan we had to remove to install the radiator earlier is installed back into place. That's going to add, of course, our airflow to our airflow credentials a bit more and help to keep the whole thing cool. And just like that, this thing is finished. It's time to power it up and see just how good it looks before diving into some detailed 7900 XTX gaming benchmarks.
Ready?
So then, does the Radeon 7900 XTX perform as well as it should? For the price point, the short answer is yes. But here's all of the data that backs up as to why that's the case. Take Spider-Man Miles Morales as a really great early indication. Here the 7900 XTX beat out the 4080, a card costing $200 more at MSRP, and obviously fell short to the 4090. It topped the last generation RTX 3000 cards and of course delivered the best AMD GPU performance we've ever seen. It was a similarly positive story in the likes of Forza Horizon 5, where this card nearly topped the charts, falling short only to the 4090, and once again beating out the 4080 in terms of performance. Titles like Apex Legends also deliver fantastic results, where AMD's strong optimization within this title actually allowed it to pull a lead over the RTX 4090. We saw similar results in Fortnite when testing at 1080p competitive settings, a game where this card beat out the competition in terms of the more expensive 4080, but didn't quite catch up with Nvidia's more pricey 4090. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 was another good performance from this card, at 4K high with FSR set to quality, 178 frames per second on average was achieved, while tuning to games like Formula 1 2022, and the 163 frame average when tested in the in-game benchmark mode was by no means a bad result. In games like Valorant, this card even topped the charts with over 500 frames per second and more than any of the other competition. Admittedly, when these kind of frame rates are involved, the performance differential is less concerning because you don't actually need this level of FPS. Battlefield 2042 at 4K high, this card delivered over 100 frames per second, but fell marginally short to both the RTX 4080 and 4090. Though knowing AMD in the past, a few driver updates might just help them push a bit further along the road and chase the tail of that more pricey 4080. We saw exactly the same thing in GTA 5, where I think some form of CPU bottleneck or frame rate cap was getting in the way, but nevertheless the Nvidia cards perform marginally better, with the AMD still performing very well in the overall context. For the price, this card is certainly a better buy than the RTX 4080, a GPU we've already ascertained to be overpriced, a little bit too large and more niche than a typical 80 SKU should be. Of course, the 7900 XTX is still no cheap graphics card, and AMD and Nvidia have certainly managed to usher in a new era of higher priced GPUs. But have AMD done a good job with their new RDNA 3 architecture that sets the way for a strong lineup of new mid-range, budget and high-end graphics card releases? Absolutely. The 7900 XTX might just be AMD's best graphics card in a long while. You can find links to all the parts mentioned down below and our full web review, where you can also read all the graphs in detail and check out the full recorded gaming benchmark runs for every title today. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.